Hello.
You must be stuck in the back.
Welcome on to test prep. How is everybody?
Hey, sorry about that.
Are you able to hear me okay?
Yeah, hey.
Perfect. Can you hear me
Awesome.
well?
Well, thank you so much for hopping on. Like I said, if this is your first time here, welcome. I'm not able to see all of my the participants on the screen right now. I'm doing this dual screen thing. So bear with me. So today we're going to be going through tips and tricks for passing the exam, as well as going through math. I had a couple requests specifically wanting to walk through the math portion of the exam. So I thought that we could cover that all together. So if we haven't met, my name is Robin Hooper. I am the Agent Services Coordinator at the Keller Williams office in Kirkland. I've been with the company for about 2.5 years, and I've been doing this for just about as long. So hopefully I should be able to answer any questions that you have and help you guys get through this part of your new career. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Excuse me. If you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. You can unmute yourself and ask questions, whatever works for you. So let's get started. All right, can you see my screen okay?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, so I like to start our test prep with something that's kind of a Keller Williams staple, which is tell me something good. Basically, tell me something great that's happening in your life right now. Maybe you just got done with school, maybe you're going to have a baby, you know, anything like that that you might want to share. And if we don't have anything, that's okay. We can just keep on trucking.
I take my test on Tuesday.
Oh, great. That is good. How exciting. How are you feeling about it?
Feeling pretty good, I think. Yeah.
Awesome. That's definitely good. Anybody else before we move along? So,
Is there beautiful weather outside?
Oh, right. Isn't it absolutely gorgeous? I am so jealous of anybody and everybody that gets to spend a ton of time outside today. I am super, super jealous. Absolutely gorgeous. I'm just readjusting my
Robin, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Just want to make sure. Sorry, guys. I'm going to throw this cord over the back of the screen really quick. There we go. Okay, so I want to get started with some study tips. As I mentioned, I've been doing this for a couple of years, and I started to see some patterns in what people do well at or what they don't do well at. And something that's come to something that I realized is nobody really ever teaches us how to study. At least I never had that experience in high school or in college. So I'd just like to touch on that. Some people who have been going through the school process or testing process and haven't passed the first time, this becomes a huge part of our conversation is how are you spending your study time? So I want to help you guys use what little time I'm sure that you have most effectively. So I have a bunch of tips up on the screen. I won't go through every single one of them. But when it comes to studying, I get a lot of people who say that they've gone through the practice tests over and over and over again, and that's our primary way of studying. And I want to caution you against that. And the reason is the practice exams are there to help gauge where you're at. help you determine if you're ready to take the exam, but they're not intended to be your sole method of studying, because really the practice exams aren't teaching you anything necessarily, but more enlightening you as to where your weak spots are, what you could improve on. So you do want to kind of take that, oh dear, approach. When you do have a little bit of time to study, use the time you have super effectively, meaning have a plan going into each studying session. If you only have 30 minutes, you can really pack a ton into that 30-minute study session if you have a plan going into it. I have a study guide that we'll go through today. I'll give that to you guys so that you have access to that anytime you'd like. That's really going to help give you direction on what topics you should spend the most time on and which ones are kind of a waste of your time. So then that helps you prioritize. So when you sit down to study, you're like, okay, I know today I'm going to review agency law. I'm really going to focus on that. And that's the only thing I'm going to study. Instead of kind of being all over the place, spending 3 hours going through 15 different topics, it's really hard for you to learn new information that way versus an intense focused session. Another thing that I have done before, and it's kind of dorky, but practice teaching what you've learned. So what I mean by that is if you were to explain to somebody what, the fount or what makes a contract legally binding, what are those things? How would you explain that to somebody who hasn't been through real estate school in a way that they could understand it? This is something you can do with a significant other, a parent, sibling, whomever will listen to you talk and see if they can get the gist. Because if you're not able to explain it to another person, you probably haven't mastered it. So as for the rest of this stuff, we'll go through the study guide and that'll be immensely helpful. So once you are done with school, within about 24 hours, you're going to get an email from AMP PSI inviting you to schedule the exam. I recommend that you schedule it as soon as you get that email. And the reason for that is we're all busy. Everybody has a million things going on. You probably have another career that you're doing now, or family, or I don't know, stuff you'd rather be doing. So it's so easy to say, okay, I'll do it later. I'll schedule it next week. I'll schedule it when I'm ready. And then that day never comes. And then you've spent however much money on school, all that energy and time on something that never happened. So even if you're not ready, even if you think you're not ready, just pick a date and put it on the calendar. Worst case scenario, you can reschedule it later, but also hopefully having that date on the calendar lights a fire and gets you more motivated to spend the time studying and getting ready for that date you already chose. So when you go to schedule your exam, they're going to give you a few different options as far as location. I have them listed out there. A lot of people try to test in Bellevue and Everett. So in order to get the date that you want, you may need to move to some of the more outlying areas in order to secure that date. You will need to finish all 90 clock hours before you're able to schedule. So you'll need to do those clock hours. You'll need to finish all of your exams and all of that submitted. When you do go to schedule it, it's going to be a fee of $138.25, and that is due at the time of scheduling. And once you're done with school, there is a timeline as to when that education expires. You have to take and pass both parts of the test within 2 years of completing school. If you go beyond those 2 years, you do need to start school over again. And realistically, you would probably need to, because I don't know about you guys, But even having been in the industry for 13 years, you don't use a lot of this in your daily conversations. Contracts, yeah, agency, yeah, but a lot of the other stuff, it's really easy to forget. So on the exam itself, there's a total of 135 questions. 100 are on the national portion of the exam, 30 are on the state, and then there are 5 trial questions that they are using as like control questions for future versions of the exam, and those 5 are not graded. You're going to have 3.5 hours to get the exam done. You are able to go to the bathroom and all of that, but they don't stop the clock. Everybody starts at the same time. So if you schedule your exam for 9 a.m., everybody there starts at 9 a.m. So that's why they don't pause the clock for anybody, because it's just easier that way. When you go to take your exam, you're not, excuse me, they're going to give you scratch paper. So when you sit down, you're going to have something to take notes on. They'll give you like a little golf pencil, but at the end of the exam, they are going to ask for that back. They're super sensitive to testing information leaving the centers. So they do want to protect that information. You find out immediately how you did. You'll get a 1-page sheet that will detail if you passed or failed each section. If you pass, they will not tell you what your score is. It'll just have to be better than 70%. Well, 70% or better. If you pass one section and fail the other, you do not need to take the section you passed again. You would only need to retest on the section you did not pass. And if that's the case, they give you on that printout a breakdown of your scores. And we'll go through a breakdown of the questions as well, so you kind of see what that might look like. And then we can figure out a study plan for you. And then if you do only pass one section, you do need to pass the other section within 6 months. If you pass that 6-month time frame, you will need to take both portions again. Each time you test, it is the same fee of $138.25. It doesn't matter if it's part of the test or the full test, they charge it all the same. So on the day of the exam, when you go to check in at the center, you will need to bring 2 forms of ID, one with a signature and one with your photo, license, and a credit card. The only thing you're going to be able to bring into your testing space is a calculator, and it has to be super basic, no programming, nothing like that, like a dollar store calculator. You'll want to dress in a way that, well, let me back up. They're going to take everything you have on you away and secure it in a backpack or in a locker. So watches, hats, wallet, purse, all of that. If you're wearing like a thick sweater or a jacket, they may ask you to take that off as well. So when you go, travel light, only wear what you need to wear, and make sure that the layer closest to your body is something that you're comfortable wearing on its own. And then as far as like bringing in anything to drink, they may allow you to bring in a single-use water bottle. They don't allow the reusable ones, but some locations don't even allow that. And then just some basics, make sure you get a good night's sleep the night before, make sure you know where you're going, and plan for traffic, plan for rain, plan for, I don't know, everybody driving 30 miles an hour because someone's pulled over, plan for every possible way that it can take you longer to get there, because if you are not there on time, they start without you and they won't make an exception. You'll have to reschedule and come back later. So do not be late. And then make sure you eat something. Being hangry is never a good look. So, just let that be one less thing on your mind. Not like, oh, what am I going to eat for lunch? I'm so hungry. I can't think. I'm so starving or thirsty or whatever that might be. Before I go through some tips and tricks, any questions on that so far?
We're good.
No.
Perfect.
So if you pass a national exam, you will be given only 30 questions. You don't need to sit 3 hours. Just go finish it and come, or you can sit all 3 hours.
I'm sorry, let me turn that up again. Say that one more time.
No, if you pass the national exam, then there are only 30 questions left in the state exam, just an example. So do you have to
Yeah.
sit for 3 hours for 30 questions, or they give you like, how do they?
Yeah, they won't change the amount of time you get. It'll be if you pass the national and only need to retake the state, then it would be 35 questions because you're still going to have those 5 trial questions. But you don't have to sit there for 3.5 hours. If you get done sooner than that, you can go. That's just, you have up to that amount of time. All right, so some tips and tricks that will help you guys pass the exam. I have a few of these up here. I also have all of these noted in the handout that we'll go through in a few minutes. I haven't uploaded that yet, so if you don't have it yet, you shouldn't, so you're good. But my absolute best advice that I can give you guys, like scrap the whole presentation. The best thing I can tell you is to take your time, slow down, read the questions, read all of the answers, and then make your answer selection based on a process of elimination. And the reason I say this is many of these questions have more than one right answer. And if you aren't reading all 4 answers that are available to you, you're going to miss that and probably not get it right. A lot of people who don't pass the exam the first time, it's because of this, because they maybe took the practice exams 100 times and they've started memorizing some of the questions, and they see the question on the exam that's similar to the one from their practice exams, and they're like, oh, I know the answer, word association, click, move on. Chances are good it's not going to be the exact same question. They're going to maybe use the same framework of the question, the same wording, the same names or same scenario, but the numbers might be different, or they'll throw in the word not or isn't. So the only way you're going to catch all of that is if you very methodically read every single word of every single question, read all 4 answers, read the question again, and then, as I said, through a process of elimination, choose what the right answer is. And I know that sounds tedious. And I know some of you were like, gosh, okay, fine, I'll read the question. But like, I cannot emphasize this enough. You have 3.5 hours. There's no rush. And I don't know about you, but I would rather sit there for the full 3.5 hours than have to come back and do it again. So that is the best advice anybody is going to give you on passing this exam. So when you are going through this process and you've read all the info, and then you're trying to decide which answer is the right one, and maybe you've decided that A is definitely not right and C is definitely not right. So now you're down to B and D, and you're not sure which one to pick. Like, they're so similar. Maybe both of them are right, which legitimately happens in the industry quite a bit. That's why the questions are formed this way, because you do have to use your judgment very often in this business. So if you're trying to decide between those 2 answers, usually the one that is the longest is going to be the right one between those 2. Not necessarily the longest answer of all 4, but once you narrow it down, if 2 answers are almost identical, the longest one is probably going to be right. And with taking your time, if you're going through and you run into questions that you're really struggling with, don't spend too much time on them. If you're like, man, I couldn't figure out the right answer to this question if my life depended on it, skip it. There may be a question later that answers that question for you. And the longer you sit there and stare at the screen, the more that's going to hurt your confidence. So skip it. The system will flag it for you so you know which questions to come back to later, and then revisit it later. And then when you do go to revisit the questions that you skipped, don't change the answers to the ones that you already completed. Statistically, you're going to change it to a question that isn't right, or excuse me, an answer that isn't right. So just stick with your gut and don't change your answers. So up on the screen, I have a little bit of math information. My next screen has some info as well for math. And we're going to go through math today. I know that a lot of people tend to struggle with math. I feel like the percentage of people who don't struggle with math is really small. So hopefully this will help you today. We'll work through some of these problems. Up on the screen are some little notes about these different pieces of the math formulas, the formula for capitalization rates, a reminder on discount points that 1 point is 1% of the loan amount, not the purchase price. When it comes to these discount point questions, I would almost bet money that when you are trying, or when you have your 4 answers, one answer is going to be based on 1% of the loan amount, and one of the answers will be based on 1% of the purchase price. Because if you mess it up, you're going to feel pretty good about that answer because both of them are going to be there. So 1% of the loan amount. Make sure you memorize your conversions. We'll touch on that in a moment. And then remembering that a mil is a unit of measurement for taxes, and it equals 1/10 of a cent. So just a little tiny fraction of a penny. On the screen, I have detailed the conversions and formulas that if you aren't familiar with these, you're going to struggle with the math portion. Now, if math is flat out never going to happen for you and you have come to terms with that in your life, you can still absolutely pass the test without acing any of the math, without getting a single math question right. You will need to refocus that effort on other portions of the exam, but some of these math problems you can probably, kind of pick your battles. Which ones can you master? Which ones are you confident are never going to happen? So just kind of have an honest conversation with yourself on that. This screen summarizes all of that. If you guys want to take a picture, grab a screenshot, you're more than welcome to do that. All right, so before we move on to the study guide, I want to give you guys an update on what is happening with the Department of Licensing. So if you are almost done with school or you are done with school, you should get your fingerprints done now. And the reason I say that is so once you are done with your exam, you've passed both parts, what you do next is typically what you would have done is then get your fingerprints, as well as choose a brokerage that you would like to align yourself with, and then get your real estate license. So things are a little out of sorts right now. The DOL is very short-handed, so they are running behind by about, they have told us 50 days. 50, meaning that it's taking them about 50 days to process your fingerprints. Now that's what they have said. I have not experienced that myself. I am definitely seeing it take about 3 weeks. So if you have not done your fingerprinting yet, the website to schedule that is identigo.com. You go on there, you say that you're getting fingerprinted in Washington for the Department of Licensing for your real estate license. You will pick a location. It takes about, once you're there, 10 minutes in and out. They do the digital fingerprints. The cost for that is just under $43. You pay when you schedule it. And so the Identigo company takes your information and then they run the reports, checking your background, and then that information is communicated to the DOL. And then the DOL has to manually process that. There is no computer system in place. So please, 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 I beg of you, if you're done with school, if you're almost done, get this scheduled and get it done. They'll keep them on file for a long time. So get that taken care of. Joseph, you have a question about fingerprints?
Yeah, I just remembered that I did my fingerprint through Indigo, I believe, in around October. That's still good, or do I have to get a new one anyway?
No, they're good for 6 years. So you have plenty of time. Once you're licensed, you will need to get your fingerprints taken every 6 years for the rest of your career, simply because we have access to people's homes. We're basically given the keys to thousands of houses. So they want to make sure people that are going in there are people who should have that kind of access. So every 6 years, they recheck that information. So you should be totally good, Joseph.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do we wait till we get results back, or is that gonna go to our licensing or wherever we apply to?
So thank you. I wasn't clear on that. So you are not able to get your real estate license until these have been processed by the DOL. So you cannot practice or say you're a real estate agent or do anything like that until you pass your test, your fingerprints are processed, you've joined a brokerage, and you've obtained your real estate license. So there's definitely some steps to go through before you can start telling people you're an agent. So yes, your fingerprints need to be in and processed. You do not get a notification of when those are in, which kind of sucks. They don't tell you anything. No news is good news. If you hear from somebody, that's not good. So did that answer your question?
Yeah, so once we do all that, do we apply to a brokerage or do we wait? I don't know, like, how do we know when we're able to apply or
Yeah.
start
So
if
as
they don't
soon as-
contact you?
Sorry. Yeah, as soon as you've passed your test, you can join a brokerage. You can start plugging into trainings. You can have access to the MLS. So you can start taking those classes because there are required classes through them as well. You're not done learning when you're done with school. This was just like the tip of the iceberg. So you can definitely start plugging in as soon as you're done with schooling. There's nothing to hold you back from that. You just can't actually sell anything. You can't market yourself until all 4 of those things are done.
How do you know when your fingerprints are done?
So great question. In our office, I monitor that. So I know, I help people get licensed a couple times a week. So I'm super familiar with the timelines and all of that. So I just keep it like a running list. The DOL will send you an email that says, congratulations, you've passed your test. You can now apply for your license. And in that email, it's going to have what's called a pre-license number. And that email you need to keep. And you're not going to get it as soon as you pass. It's going to take about a week, possibly more, before you get that email. And then also, I usually end up on the phone with the DOL like once a week. So when I'm on the phone with them, I check in on everybody else who's like in the queue to get licensed. So for me, the way that we handle it at our office is I ask you, when did you do your fingerprints? And I keep track of it. And I know it's not going to be sooner than 2 weeks. It's just not. And then I make an appointment and we walk through the process together. It takes about 15 minutes once all that information is in.
Okay.
Any other questions about that before we move on?
Is there a way to print the stuff you had up on the screen about with the math?
To print, I mean, you're welcome to like
Or I
take
can
a
just
picture.
I'll just do that. I
Take a
wasn't fast enough.
screenshot. Yeah, you're welcome to screenshot that. Do you need the previous one
Okay.
as well?
please.
I spelled Mills wrong, but you get it.
We get it. Okay, awesome. I think that's all I missed.
Perfect. Okay.
Was there one before that?
Not on math, no.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to stop share just for a moment so I can find the things I'm looking for. I know some of you are on your phones, and I was planning to upload the attachment as a PDF, but they won't go through if you're on your phone. So give me one moment and I'll grab that link really quick so that everybody has access to that. Feel free to download this, save it. If you have downloaded this before, I did just update this a couple days ago. So this version is going to be a little bit different than what you have had in the past. Here. Okay. All right, so I just copy and pasted that link into the chat. I'm going to go ahead and open this up on my screen and share that with you so that we can go through this together as well. All right, can you guys see that okay?
So this is different than like the previous one we printed?
Not, I mean, it's just updated. It's not like the basic information has changed, but I did update some things that were a little bit outdated, but not like the question breakdown or anything like that.
Okay.
No, this is not the right one. Hold on one moment. Like, wait, that looks the same. There we go. All right, take two. So this is the one that should be in your in the chat. So I want to start here, and this is your basic study guide for the exam. Make this a little bit bigger. So these two images are breakdowns of the questions that you can expect on the exam. Up here at the top, that you can barely see, one moment. This is the state portion of the exam. It does have 30 questions, as I mentioned earlier, and this tells you how many questions there are per topic. So then you know where to study, or excuse me, where to focus your study efforts. With this, I have ordered this from most questions to least, so in order of importance. And then down below, I have the national breakdown as well. So up here at the top, contracts is going to be the most questions because this is going to be one of the biggest parts of your career. Understanding contracts, being able to write them, and understand the situations where you might apply certain addendums or clauses and all of that kind of stuff. Principles of agency and practices of real estate are tied for 2. Real estate calculations or math, and then financing each have 10. So when you do the math on these 5 categories, this is 63 questions if I did the math right, and you only need 70 to pass. So that gives you a really clear picture of how important these top 5 categories are to your national score. If you catch yourself spending a whole bunch of time down here at the bottom studying this stuff, don't do stop. You're hurting yourself for no reason. This stuff, this is like aggregate. This isn't going to help you pass it. I mean, you might get 1 or 2 questions right, but if you can spend the same amount of time on contracts and get 17, 15, 12 right, you're going to be in much better shape. So to further break this down, On the next page, this has all of the details of the national exam and the subtopics within the topics, if that makes sense. So let's look at principles of agency here down in the bottom right. I'm going to make this bigger because I know this font is tiny. Okay. So general principles of agency has a total of 13 questions. And this is broken out here into recall and recognition, and then application and analysis. Recall and recognition is basically like vocabulary, being able to tell somebody what the definition of the word is. Application and analysis is your understanding of the concept and how to apply that to specific scenarios, using your judgment, reasoning, those separate processes of your brain. So flashcard memorization, probably not going to be enough to help you pass the exam. You do need to work through some of the situational type problems as well. So then it takes that concept of agency with 13 questions and breaks it down into little subtopics so you can see exactly what you need to study. And so this is your study guide. If I were you, they didn't have this when I was in school, at least I didn't know about it. But I would sit down and be like, okay, I'm just going to start with B because it has 4 questions, whereas this up here only has 2. So I'm going to start with the ones that have the highest number of questions, and then I'll work my way to the ones with the least. So then you're spending more time getting more bang for your buck. And so this goes on to the next page, breaking down the rest of the exam as well. Sorry if it's kind of loud, like all the neighborhood kids are outside playing. So they got their bikes and stuff out, so I apologize if it's noisy. All right, and then this page, page 5, this is a similar breakdown for the state portion. There are much less questions, so this is a much smaller portion, but it tells you over here, these 13 questions, what subtopics are covered and what you need to make sure you understand. So my hope for you is that you will take this, and when you have your 30 minutes, your hour, whatever that looks like in your life to study, that you get this out and you're like, okay, I'm going to start with contracts because Robin said that's the most important one. Now, I didn't say that. This all comes from PSI, the testing facilitator. This is on their website. You just have to dig to find it. So I dug for you. But, start with
Where's the
contracts.
link for this?
I don't have the link, but it's AMP PSI's website.
I mean,
used to register.
what? Okay. I meant like to print this,
Oh, it's in the chat.
or there isn't one.
Yeah, it's in the chat. Box. Where is my chat? So yeah, my hope is that you'll sit down and then just go through this line by line until you feel like you've mastered that topic. And unless you're like exhausted, I wouldn't, not even exhausted. No, actually I take that back. I wouldn't move on from one topic until you feel good about it. Unless it's like, that one topic where you're like, this is never going to happen, okay, I did that on mine. I used to be terrible at math. And so I don't think that is what helped me pass. But, go through it until you've exhausted it, until you are certain you're comfortable. And then you move on to agency, and then you move on to practice. Just be very deliberate and methodical. The system's all here designed for you. And then on the rest of this packet, those tips and tricks that we talked about, a lot of that stuff is detailed here. So you can refer back to this. And then on the back page here, some resources for you, a link to our Facebook group. If you're not part of it, we have about 140 or so people that are part of the group that are studying for their Washington State exam. It's a great place to network with other people, even people from the other parts of the state. Once you are licensed, chances are good, you're going to have an area you like to work in, and maybe that's not Bellingham, maybe that's not Spokane, wherever that is. And if you get buyers in that area that you're like, "Ugh, I'm not going to drive 3 hours round trip every time they want to see a house," you can refer them. And that's an income generating activity. So build those relationships, and then get some support within the group as well. If you don't have any books from school and you're more of a tangible person, Rockwell has a great book, The Insider's Guide to Passing the Washington State Real Estate Exam. I bought mine at Half Price Books for $9. It was like 2 years ago, but still, it was super cheap, and they do sell them on Amazon. I wouldn't necessarily say go spend money, but if you feel like you need a little extra help, that's a cheap additional help. And then Quizlet is a flashcard app to help you learn the vocab. And then Prep Agent on YouTube is a free resource with videos of a guy just talking about this stuff in plain language. So I definitely encourage that as well. Okay. I closed out my slides, so let me get that back up. Any questions while I pull that up?
This is
I have
probably a
one
stupid question,
question.
but where do I find the chat box?
Oh, so at the bottom of your screen, there should be a box on the right-ish, I believe, that says chat. And it's probably orange.
Okay, Robin, I have a question.
Yeah.
For this study, for the book, I have 2 books, and then I passed the state part and I didn't pass the national.
Mhm.
But when I want to study, I get confused. Which of those books should I study? The one of them is the real estate exam book, or the Washington Real Estate Fundamental?
So good question. So when you go to Rockwell, they give you 3 books, not give you, part of their curriculum is 3 books. And the one that, if you're studying, and hopefully this will show up, but I like this one. Yeah, it doesn't see it, it doesn't pick it up on the screen, but it's the one that says Insider's Guide to Passing the Exam. I recommend that one because it summarizes all of the information really nicely. If you need a deeper dive into something, like just some more information, then it would make sense to get into one of those other books to learn the information. But as far as like studying, refreshing your memory, you should be totally good with that Insider's Guide.
Thank you.
Alrighty, so did that answer your question, Tarani?
Yes.
So I talked a little bit longer than I expected, but we can still get through some math here. So Diana, I know that you had asked about math, and a couple other people did too. Where's my phone? Okay. Okay, proration. Okay, so let's talk about proration. Let me just find a good math problem. Okay. This is a proration problem. There's 2 different kinds of proration problems when it comes to math. So what I'm going to try to do, hold on. Okay. I was hoping I could do two screen shares, one from my iPad and one from the computer, but it does not appear that I can. So we're going to switch back and forth. All right, so on this math problem, closing is set for August 1st. The seller's already paid the property taxes for the year, totaling $6,000. How much of that is the buyer's responsibility? So with this math problem, as I mentioned, there are two different ways to prorate taxes. This one is more by month, and then the other one is more per diem. So then you're doing the math, you know, per day. So let me share my screen. All right. So August 1st is the closing. Oh, let me make this a little skinnier. Maybe I can't. There we go. And then the seller paid $6K. All right, so if we take this $6,000 and divide it by 12, so 6 divided by 12, it's going to give us a monthly tax amount of $500. So since the buyer needs to reimburse the seller for August, September, October, November, and December, we have 5 full months that the buyer is responsible for. So we take that 500, we multiply that by 5, which gives us a total of $2,500. So that one is a little bit simpler, I would say. So with this, you have that 2,500. So this would equal a credit to the seller and a debit to the buyer if we were talking about settlement statements. So what that basically means is at the end of a transaction, the buyer and seller each receive a settlement statement that details all of the fees associated with them purchasing that home, where they're coming from, who they're paid to, all of that. So with that, excuse me. So with that, they then have to dictate who is the one who's receiving the credit and who is the one that is paying that. So with the buyer paying that back to the seller, it's basically like your bank account. If your job was to pay you, that's a credit to you. If you buy something at TJ Maxx, that's a debit from you and a credit to them. So you want to, you want to think about that, those debits and credits, not just for taxes, but for anything in those terms. At least I think that that's helpful, so that it puts it into terms that you're used to, that you use every single day. Does that make sense? JT, did you have a question?
Yeah, I answered one of my questions, but the other question would be, obviously we would do taxes by month, but like, would they ever have it done proration by day for this, or would they tell you?
Yeah, so let me pull up one by day. That was going to be my next stop because it is a very different process. Okay, so this is one where we're going to calculate the taxes per diem. So the closing date is August 16th. The property's fair market value is $180,000. In this community, property is assessed at 50% of its market value, and taxes are applied at 55 mils per dollar of the assessed value. Using a 365-day calendar year and assuming the buyer is responsible for the closing day, what would be the buyer's prorated share of the annual property taxes be? So this is a lot of words, a lot of information. So I want to start by breaking it down. When we did the last proration problem, of course, the date of closing matters. And not just the date of closing, but who's responsible for that day. Because when you get down to closing, legally, the seller has until 9 p.m. before they have to be out of that house. So is the buyer responsible for that or the seller? And so these are the kind of questions that escrow usually handles. And in this problem, it tells you, assuming the buyer is responsible for the closing day. And every day matters in this situation because, as you can see here, these questions, or these answers, excuse me, are only slightly different from the other because they probably included that the day of closing, and then some of them they didn't. So then we're going to take this step by step. So I wish I could share 2 screens at once, but I'm going to have to leave this one and then share on my iPad so I can write this out. So give me just a moment. Okay. So closing August 16th. And then the market value is 180K, right? And so, excuse me, property is assessed at 50%. And it is calculated at 55 mils per dollar. And then we're going to prorate that per diem. So those are our variables. And this is exactly how I would start out your problem, is making a note of the information that's most important. So now we do our math. So from here, the first thing we need to figure out is what the total annual taxes are. So if the property is assessed at 50%, as it says here, we're going to take that 180K and divide it by 2. And that gives us, anybody know what that number is?
90.
Yeah, 90. Sometimes I just don't want to hear myself talk anymore. $90,000. So from here, this is the amount that the county is actually taxing the property on. And this is very common. Assessed value never matches property value. And any homeowner, you want it that way. Because if those 2 numbers match, you're paying more property taxes. The assessed value of the property has no bearing whatsoever on market value. So anyhow, that was just a sidebar. So for mils, those are applied at 55 mils per dollar. And mils are 1/10 of a cent, right? So we are then going to take this and we're going to multiply that by 0.055. And then that is going to give us our annual tax amount of $4,950. So this is the amount the seller has already paid. So now we need to figure out what the amount of property taxes per day. So we need to know how many days there are between August 16th and December 31st. So for this, I work backwards. You can do it however you would like, of course. So in December, there's 31 days. In November, there's 30. October, 31. And then September, 30. August, 16, because it includes the day of, sorry, I rotated my iPad, includes the day of closing. So then we're going to add all these days together. And when we do that, they add up to 138 days. Now, if you do not know how many days there are in every month, the reason I work backwards is because I know that there's New Year's Eve on the 31st in December. I know Halloween's on the 30th. And then so I know by default, in my brain at least, those other two are 30 days. So I'm good there. But once I'm able to get back on camera, I'll show you a little trick that might help you remember that. So back to our math problem, 4950 divided by 138. And that gives us a daily tax rate of $13.56. Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. I don't know where my brain is. Back up. Totally wrong. Totally wrong. I'm so sorry. Skipped ahead. 365. So we take the annual tax rate, divide that by 365 to get the per diem of the 1356. So now that we have the per diem here, I'm going to move that over here so I have some more space. We do $13.56 times 138 days. And then what do we come to on that? Anybody? All right. It is one. Oh. Let me pull it up. Sorry. All right. So the total is going to be $1,871.28, making the answer B. Does that make sense? I know it's a lot of processes, like going down, like working through it. But if you really move through methodically and slowly like that, gathering the important data, where do I need to start? If I'm going to figure out the, how much taxes the buyer owes, well, how much are the taxes to begin with? And then, well, if I'm charging them per day, then how many days am I charging them for? So just kind of, if somebody owed you money per diem, how would you figure it out? Sometimes when you think of these problems in terms of it being your money or doing your taxes, and the government knows the answer, but they're not going to give you the answer. You have to figure it out on your own. So it's kind of like that. If it's your own money, you're a little more invested. So when you think of it kind of like that, I feel like it shifts something in the brain to where it connects a bit more, if that makes sense. Any questions on that? Good job, Drew.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I've been studying lots.
Good.
And I'm in
right.
freaking California on top of a mountain working.
Oh, that sounds amazing. I'm in my bedroom at home. Inside.
California test doesn't have math.
All right, I know it's 5, but let's do one more math problem. If you have to hop off, you're not going to hurt my feelings. I understand. Let's do this one because I feel like this is one of the questions I get asked the most when it comes to math. Well, taxes, and then this specific problem, excuse me. Okay. A rural lot runs 500 feet east-west along its northern boundary, 600 feet east-west along its southern boundary. Its eastern boundary runs 200 feet north-south, while its western boundary runs 224 feet in a diagonal northeast/southwest direction. The cost of the land is $6 per square foot. What is the cost of this lot? So I'm going to go ahead and give you the answer up front, and then we'll go through how we got there. So the answer to this one, oh, just kidding. We'll do the answer later. All right. So when it comes to a problem like this, draw it out. I think that I don't know how else you would figure that out. So just, I picked the northern boundary to be the top boundary. It doesn't have to be that, but it just made sense to me because that's how you draw out a compass. So the 500 feet along the top, and then east-west would be this, or runs east-west along the south, so that's the bottom. And then the eastern boundary is 200 feet running north-south, and then the western's on an angle at 224 feet. And that creates this shape. And once you've got that shape drawn out, I think it makes a lot more sense. So from there, we then need to figure out how many square feet are in this shape. So to do that, split it up into two separate shapes. So you've got your rectangle and then you've got your triangle. So since this is 500 feet, this is 600, the difference from this dotted line to this corner is 100 feet, right? So now you've only got a rectangle that's 500 feet by 200 feet. And then over here, you've got a triangle that's 200 feet by 100 feet. And then we've got our diagonal here. So since we have the formulas memorized, we know that to get the square footage of the rectangle is length times width, which gives us a total square footage of 100,000 square feet. And then for the triangle, that formula is length times, well, it doesn't matter, length times width divided by 2. And that gives us a total of 10,000 square feet for this shape. The diagonal number doesn't matter. I didn't even need to put it on here. The diagonal does not matter for triangles for the purposes of real estate. So when we add these two together, we get a total of 110,000 square feet. And then you multiply that by 6, and that gives you an answer of $660,000. Does that make sense? Was anybody struggling with this one?
So I thought you have to calculate the diagonal and, sorry, the triangle one and square one and add them together, then multiply by the 6.
Yeah, yep, exactly that. You do the length times width of the rectangle, and then you do the length times width divided by 2 on the triangle to get those two separate square footages, add them together, and then multiply them by 6. Yeah, most of the math is just very methodical step by step. Like if you know where point A is, you know where point Z is, then you're just kind of filling in the blanks. And I know that really oversimplifies math, because I tell you what, if somebody had told me that 10 years ago, yeah, I don't know if that helps. Hopefully it does.
It does.
All right, so before we hop off today, is there anything else that you're struggling with that I can answer for you or do for you before I let you guys get back to your evenings?
No, you've been doing good. Appreciate your help.
Yeah, so
Sure.
much.
I'm sorry that we
Thank you,
didn't get
Robin.
through very much today. This was a chatty Kathy. But so before I let you guys go, the next test prep is going to be on the 17th, so next Saturday. And those are 2 hours. So I can always fit a ton of stuff in that. Usually that first part, I buzz through it a bit quicker. So it takes like maybe 20 minutes. And then we have an hour and 40 minutes or so of going through material, deep diving. So I'll send out reminders for that when we get a little bit closer to the day. And if you have anything in particular that you'd like me to cover, you're always welcome to text me or email me. Just
bonus, yeah.
let me know what I can do to help. Same with if you have any questions or struggles, just let me know. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for hopping on. Have a great night. Go outside if you haven't been outside and soak up some of the sun. And I will hopefully see you at the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robin.
Of course. Okay. Bye.
Bye bye.